My sister's lawyer slid a cashier's check across the conference table and asked if we could all be adults about this. $50,000. Printed. Certified. Ready to cash. I didn't touch it. For 9 years, I bathed my mother, fed my mother, and carried my mother to bed. Nobody paid me $1 in those same years. My sister paid herself $1,500 a month out of our mother's money for the care I was doing for free. And here is the part her lawyer didn't know yet. Reading money trails is my job now. Courts appoint me when a family's trustee can't be trusted. 4 years earlier, the trustee nobody could trust was sitting across that table from me, wearing pearls. And I had already done the math she was praying no one would ever do. $256,000. That is what she took. The check on that table was her offer to make it all quietly disappear. I slid it back across the wood and folded my hands. My name is Nora Hale. I am 39 years old, and I live in Sacramento, California. If you are new here, welcome. I am glad this story found you. Take 1 second to subscribe, because stories like mine don't get told at family dinners. They get whispered in parking lots, or they get told here. And before we're done, drop the city you are listening from in the comments. I want to know how far this one travels, because to understand that check and why sliding it back felt better than cashing it ever could have, you have to leave that conference room with me. You have to go back, all the way back. 9 years before, the morning of my mother's funeral. That funeral is the hinge this whole story swings on. Hold on to it. Everything I am about to tell you happened either before that day or after it. And I promise you this, by the end, you will know exactly who did what and exactly what it cost them. So, 9 years before the funeral, that is where the old life starts. And that is where we begin. I was 26. I worked the front desk at a dental office off Fulton Avenue. I had a 1-bedroom apartment with a window that looked at another window, and my biggest problem in the world was a car that needed brakes. My sister Dana was 33, 7 years older, and already the family's official success story. She sold houses. She was good at it. She never missed an open house, never missed a manicure, and never, ever missed a chance to remind us of both. Our mother was 61. Her name was Lena, but you can just think of her as what she was, a retired school teacher who taught 3rd grade for 31 years, kept a garden that embarrassed the neighbors, and wrote every recipe she ever loved into a blue spiral notebook that lived on the kitchen counter like a family member. That notebook mattered to me then because it smelled like cinnamon and had her handwriting in it. Remember it anyway. It matters more later, in a way none of us could have guessed. On an ordinary Tuesday in October, my mother had a stroke at her own kitchen table. Halfway through a crossword, a neighbor found her because the back door was open, and the kettle had been going so long, the whole kitchen was full of steam. By the time I got to the hospital, my mother, the fastest talker in any room, the woman who could grade 28 spelling tests during one episode of Jeopardy, could not hold a spoon. The doctors said the left side would come back. Partially. It came back less than partially. She would need help dressing, bathing, cooking, and eventually walking. Not for a season. For the rest of her life. 11 days after the stroke, we had what Dana called a family meeting, which meant Dana talking and everyone else nodding. She stood in Mom's living room with a legal pad and said the sentence I want you to memorize, because you are going to hear it again and again in this story. And by the end, it is going to mean the opposite of what she thought it meant. She said, Samonin has to be the responsible one. And then she laid out the plan. Mom had savings, 31 years of teaching, a paid-off house on Almond Street, a pension, a modest pile of careful money. To protect all of it, Dana said, Mom would sign two things. First, a power of attorney, which is just a paper that lets one person sign and spend as if they were you. And second, a living trust, which is a legal basket you put a house and savings into, with one person named to carry the basket. That person is called the trustee. The trustee's whole job, their only job, is to spend the money for the person the basket belongs to, not for themselves. Ever. Dana named herself the trustee. Of course, she did. She sold houses. She understood paperwork. She was the responsible one. And me. Dana turned to me with the legal pad and said I was, quote, between things anyway. So wouldn't it make sense for me to stay with Mom for a while? Just until things stabilized? A while. Just until things stabilized. I want to be honest with you about this part, because it matters. Nobody forced me. I loved my mother the way you love the person who taught you to read. I gave notice at the dental office, let the apartment go, and moved into my childhood bedroom with 2 suitcases and a plant. I told myself it was temporary. Half of you listening already know how that sentence ends. On my first night back in that house, my mother called me over to her chair. With her good hand, she pressed something into my palm and closed my fingers around it. It was the spare house key, tied onto a loop of red ribbon she'd cut from the Christmas box, because her hands couldn't manage a key ring anymore. Yours, she said. One word cost her a lot that year. She spent it on that one. I hung that key by the door, on the little brass hook under the light switch, and for 9 years it was the first thing I saw every time I came in carrying groceries, and the last thing I saw every time I turned off the porch light. Hold on to the key, too. Like the notebook, it is going to come back, and when it does, it will not mean what it meant that night. 7 years before the funeral. So, 2 years into this arrangement, the first crack showed. I just didn't know what I was looking at. By then, my days had a shape. Up at 6. Oh, Mom's pills sorted into the days of the week tray. Breakfast, she could manage with one hand. Physical therapy exercises at the kitchen table. Her cursing softly. Me counting reps. Laundry, bathing, lunch, the crossword we now did together. Me writing. Her pointing. I had built her a wheelchair ramp off the back porch out of plywood and a borrowed circular saw, because the quote from a company had made Dana wince and say the trust needed to be careful with money. The trust needed to be careful with money. Remember that sentence, too, because that spring, Dana put me on an allowance. That is the only honest word for it. $800 a month for groceries, Mom's supplies, gas, and household costs. All of it loaded onto a prepaid card, with the receipts to be photographed and sent to her by the 5th of each month. I kept them in a plastic zipper bag by the toaster, like a teenager, keeping proof of chores. I told myself it was fine, organized, even. She was the trustee. Trustees track things. Then came the pharmacy. It was a Thursday, 2:40 p.m., and I was standing at the counter at the drugstore on Marconi with my mother's blood pressure refill and a bag of the only lotion that didn't crack the skin on her hands. The card was declined. I ran it again. Declined again. There was a line behind me and a girl at the register young enough to be embarrassed for me, and I stood there doing that thing you do, smiling, patting pockets I knew were empty. I paid with my own debit card from my own checking account, which at that point held about $300 against a life, with no paycheck in it. In the car, I called Dana. She answered from an open house. I could hear her open house voice. Before she even switched out of it, she said, "Oh, that." She'd moved some money between accounts, and the card would refresh Friday. And then she said, in the tone you'd use to reassure a child, "Nora, you don't need to worry about the finances. The trust is paying for professional care now. Everything is handled. The trust is paying for professional care now." I sat in that parking lot and let the sentence go right past me. I thought professional care meant the physical therapist who came on Wednesdays. I thought it meant the visiting nurse the insurance sent once a month. I was tired in a way that made curiosity feel like a luxury. And if you have ever been the person holding a whole household together with your two hands, you know exactly the kind of tired I mean. You don't investigate sentences. You get the lotion. You drive home. You make dinner. So, I did. And that sentence sat in the trust's bank records, quietly compounding for 5 more years before I understood it. Here is your first receipt for staying with me this long. Though, a promise. That sentence, "The trust is paying for professional care now," was the truest thing my sister ever said to me. It just wasn't true, the way I heard it. When we get to the binder, and we will get to the binder, you'll see that sentence again, printed 84 times, in black and white, with a dollar figure next to it. Don't lose it. Life went on the way it does, when nobody's watching. Mom improved a little, then plateaued. Her speech came back in pieces, short sentences, dry ones. Her humor survived the stroke, completely intact, which felt like a private joke between her and God. On good afternoons, she'd direct me around the kitchen with her good hand while I cooked out of the blue notebook. Her handwriting slanting across those pages, pot roast, Sunday chicken, the lemon cake with the crackly top she made for every birthday, including her own. She couldn't hold a pen well anymore, but sometimes I'd find the notebook moved, open to a different page than I'd left it, like she'd been visiting her own life. 4 years before the funeral, Thanksgiving happened, and with it, the kitchen. Dana hosted that year, which was new. She usually declared holidays exhausting. We drove across town, me guiding Mom's wheelchair, up a ramp that I noticed was professionally built, cedar with rounded railings. And then we came inside, and I stopped walking. Dana had a new kitchen, not new appliances. A new kitchen, walls, moved, an island the size of a rowboat, veined white stone, brass fixtures, a faucet you waved your hand at, double ovens, the kind of kitchen that gets photographed. I stood there holding a store, bought pie in my dented pan, and I said what anyone would say. I said, "Wow, Dana's husband. I'll just call him her husband. He matters less than the furniture." Raised a glass before dinner and toasted his wife. And then he said the family had been blessed this year, that an inheritance from his late aunt had finally come through, and that Dana had earned every inch of that kitchen. And then he smiled at the table and said, "To being responsible." Everyone drank. I drank. My mother, at my left, did not lift her glass. I noticed, and I didn't notice, the way you register weather. At that dinner, my niece Emmy was 8 years old, and she spent the whole meal next to her grandmother's wheelchair, showing her drawings, holding up each one until Mom nodded. I want you to keep Emmy in the corner of your eye for the rest of this story. In a family, the little ones see everything and are told nothing. And what they do with that later is one of the few genuinely fair things in this world. Driving home that night, my mother looked out the window at the Christmas lights, starting up on the houses, and said one of her short, dry sentences. She said, "Nice kitchen." 2 words. I laughed. I thought she was being funny. She wasn't looking at me when she said it, and her hand, the good one, was closed tight around the strap of her purse, where she kept a little spiral pad. She'd point it sometimes, when words wouldn't come. I thought nothing of it. You never think anything of it. That is how these stories work. The person being robbed is often the first to know and the last to be believed. And sometimes she can't say 4 words in a row. So she says 2, and hopes somebody's listening. I wasn't. Not yet. Stay with me. This is where it turns. 18 months before the funeral. The envelope came. By then, my mother was sliding. A second, smaller stroke. That spring had taken most of her remaining speech and all of her walking. We had a hospital bed in the living room now, facing the garden window, because she liked to supervise the roses even when she could no longer name them. My days had narrowed to a loop of medication times and turning schedules, and I knew her body's language better than I had ever known anyone's words. It was a Monday morning, around 10 a.m., and I was bringing in the mail, catalogs, a water bill, and one heavy envelope from a bank called Sierra Pacific Savings. Thick paper, a plastic window, my mother's name showing through it. At this address, here is what stopped me. My mother didn't bank at Sierra Pacific Savings. 30 years at the same credit union. I deposited her pension check there myself. First Wednesday of every month, I stood in the driveway, turning that envelope over like it might explain itself. I didn't open it. It wasn't addressed to me, and I was raised by a school teacher. I set it on the counter next to the blue notebook, and I called Dana, because Dana handled the finances, and asking her was the responsible thing to do. She came by that same afternoon, which should have told me something. Dana did not come by. Dana scheduled. But that day she arrived within 2 hours, in the middle of a workday, picked the envelope up off the counter with 2 fingers, and dropped it into her purse, in one motion, the way you'd disappear a parking ticket. Insurance paperwork, she said, for the house. I've got it. I said the house insurance came from Meridian, and the bill came in March, and my sister looked at me. And I want to describe this look exactly, because I've spent 4 years learning to read faces across conference tables, and I've never seen a cleaner example. It was not guilt. It was inventory. She was calculating, in real time, how much I knew, how tired I was, and how much a woman with no paycheck, no apartment, and no time could afford. Push. The math came out in her favor, and her face relaxed into a smile. Nora, she said, someone has to be the responsible one. Go take care of Mom. Let me take care of the rest. Then she kissed the top of our mother's head, said something bright at her, and left. Through the garden window I watched her car pull away. And when I turned around, my mother was looking at me. Not vaguely. At me. At two. Her good hand was moving against the blanket. A small repeated motion. And it took me a second to recognize it. She was writing. On nothing. Nothing. With no pen. Her hand was making the shapes of writing. I brought her the little spiral pad and folded her fingers around a marker, and she worked at it for a long minute. And what came out was a wobbling line, and part of a letter that might have been an S. And then her hand stopped cooperating, and she closed her eyes. And I told her it was okay. And I put the pad away, and I hated myself a little for being relieved. The number inside that envelope. I would not learn for 3 more years. When I finally did, I wasn't holding it in a driveway. I was holding it in a courtroom, and it was an exhibit, and it had a sticker on it with a number, and my sister's lawyer was objecting to it in a voice that had stopped sounding smooth. But that came later. First came the worst day, and I need to walk you through it almost minute by minute, because everything I am, I built on top of that afternoon. My mother died in the winter, 18 months after the envelope, quietly, in the hospital bed by the garden window. 4 days after her 70th birthday, I was holding her hand. The last thing she ever did on this earth was squeeze my finger twice, which had been our signal for yes. The funeral was on a Friday. The service started at 2 p.m. at St. Bridget's. the church she'd taken us to as kids. I don't remember the sermon. I remember Dana's eulogy was polished and mentioned herself 9 times. I didn't count that day. There is a video. And later, in a different frame of mind, I counted. I remember Emmy, 12 years old now, crying the way kids do when it is their first real one, with her whole body. I remember thinking my mother would have said the lilies were overpriced. Afterward, everyone came back to the house on Almond Street. My house is how I would have said it then, without thinking, the house I had run for 9 years. Neighbors brought casseroles. Dana stood by the fireplace, accepting condolences, like a receiving line. At 4:20 p.m., I know the time because I was watching the coffee maker finish a cycle. Dana found me in the kitchen. She had a manila envelope in her hand, and she held it out with a face arranged into sympathy. And she said, "I know this is a hard day, but there is never going to be a good day." So, I dried my hands on the towel and opened it, standing between the coffee maker and my mother's blue notebook. Inside was a letter from a law office, dated 2 days earlier. 2 days earlier, my mother was in a funeral home, and my sister was at a lawyer's office. The letter said 3 things, in numbered paragraphs, and I am going to give them to you the way they hit me, one at a time. 1. As trustee, Dana was terminating my quote-unquote occupancy of the trust property, and I was to vacate the house on Almond Street within 30 days. 2. The trust would be seeking reimbursement from me for below market rent for my occupancy, $800 a month for the last 36 months. That is $28,800. My sister was billing me for the room I slept in between getting up at 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. to turn our mother so she wouldn't get pressure sores. That number is what 9 years of my life netted out to. In her arithmetic, a debt. 3. All keys to the property were to be surrendered immediately. I read it twice. The kitchen was full of people, balancing paper plates. Somebody was telling a story about my mother's garden, and my sister stood there in her funeral dress, watching me read, with her head tipped at the angle that means concern in photographs. I want to tell you, I said something devastating. I didn't. Here is everything I said and everything I did, and I've never once regretted the smallness of it. I put the letter back in the envelope. I walked to the front door, with Dana following, murmuring about how the lawyers said it had to be formal, nothing personal. Someone has to be, and I lifted the red ribbon off the little brass hook, the key my mother had pressed into my hand 9 years earlier, with the one word she could afford. And I set it in my sister's open palm. I said, "You'll want to water the roses." She'd haunt you. Over the roses. Then I went upstairs and I packed 2 suitcases, the same 2 I'd arrived with. And on my way through the kitchen, I took one thing that wasn't clothes, the blue spiral notebook. Dana watched me tuck it under my arm and said, generously, that I could keep it, that she was keeping the real valuables safe anyway. The real valuables. Hold that phrase. It is going to come back at the very end of this story and detonate. I carried my suitcases past the casseroles and the murmuring neighbors, and I walked out of my mother's house at 5:05 p.m. on the day of her funeral, with 400 and change in my checking account, a plant, and a recipe book. I was 35 years old. If you have ever been the one who stayed, the one who gave up the job, the apartment, the years, while somebody else gave speeches about responsibility, I want you to do something for me, right now. Put one word in the comments. Just one. Stayed. That is it. You'll see how many of you there are. I read every one of them, and I promise you, there is an army of us, and almost nobody ever says thank you. Consider this me saying it. 6 weeks after the funeral, I answered a help-wanted listing for a file clerk at a probate law firm downtown called Kessler and Voss. Probate law, if you've never had the pleasure, is the law of what happens to people's money when they die or can't manage it anymore. Wills, trusts, guardianships, the whole machinery. I took the job because it paid $16 an hour, and I could walk there from the studio apartment I'd found. And for no deeper reason than that, I want to be honest about that. I didn't storm out of my mother's funeral with a master plan. I stormed out with a plant. The plan found me. It came in the form of a 61-year-old paralegal named Constance, who had been at that firm longer than the carpet, wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and ran the file room like a harbor master. Constance trained me, and Constance noticed things. She noticed that I filed trustee accountings. Those are the financial report cards trustees are supposed to produce. Slower than everything else, because I was reading them. She noticed that I asked questions file clerks don't ask. What happens if a trustee just spends it? Who checks? Does anyone actually check? One evening, maybe 3 months in, she put a cup of terrible office coffee in front of me and said, "All right, who was it?" I said. I didn't know what she meant. She said, "Honey, half the people in this building are here because of somebody. Who was yours?" And for the first time, the only time, really, I told the whole story out loud, start to finish, standing in a file room that smelled like toner, the stroke, the key on the ribbon, the allowance, and, is the declined card, the kitchen with the rowboat island, the envelope from a bank my mother never used, the letter at the funeral with its 3 numbered paragraphs, $28,800 of back rent for the privilege of 9 years of nights. Constance did not flinch. She did not call my sister a name. She did not tell me everything happens for a reason, or that family is family, or any of the other sentences people hand you like expired coupons. She listened all the way to the end with her arms folded, and then she said the line, "I will remember for the rest of my life." She said it the way you'd state a filing deadline. People lie. Honey, paper doesn't. So learn to speak paper. That is it. That is the whole sermon. And I am telling you, those 3 sentences reorganized my skeleton, because what she was really saying was, you don't have to win an argument with your sister. You will never win an argument with your sister. Arguments are her home field, but every dollar your sister moved for 9 years left a mark on a page somewhere, and pages don't have a home field. Pages don't get tired. Pages wait. So I learned to speak paper. Here is the montage, and I'll keep it honest and quick, because you already know I survive. That is not the question. The question is what I turned into. So let me just show you the 4 years. Year 1, I was a file clerk who spent her lunch breaks reading closed case files like other people read novels. Nights, I enrolled in a paralegal certificate program, online. And on Tuesdays, paid for $80 at a time. My apartment was 300 square feet, and on the counter, the only counter, sat my mother's blue notebook. And on the nights, the coursework made my eyes cross. I would cook one thing out of it. The pot roast page has a grease, stain-shaped, like Ohio. The lemon cake page is warped from steam. I mention this because that notebook stopped being a keepsake that year and became a companion. First thing I saw when I came in the door, there was no key on a ribbon anymore. My new key lived on a plain ring, and some nights, hanging it up by the door, the lightness of that key ring was the loneliest thing in the room. Year 2, Kessler and Voss made me a probate paralegal, and I found out what I was. I could read a trustee accounting, the way Constance read people. Columns confessed to me. I found a 40-cent error in a $4 million estate once. And I know exactly how insufferable that sentence sounds. And I stand by it. Year 3. One of the attorneys pulled me aside and said the words licensed professional fiduciary. In California, that is a real license. A person the court itself can appoint to manage money for people who can't, or to replace a trustee who has gone crooked. There is an exam, a background check, continuing education, the works, he said. You already think like one. Sit for it. I sat for it. I passed it on the first try, 3 years and 1 month after my mother's funeral. And by the time this story catches up to its own beginning, to that conference room, that check, that lawyer asking if we could be adults, I was managing the affairs of 14 clients, appointed by judges, bonded and insured, with a caseload full of other people's Danas. Do you see the shape of it now? For 9 years, my sister's whole advantage was that she spoke a language I didn't. Trusts, accountings, powers of attorney, the grammar of other people's money. So, I didn't get angry. I got fluent. And then, 3 years and 2 months after the funeral, on an ordinary Sunday night in my little apartment, with the pot roast page open, and the whole place smelling like my mother's kitchen, I finally sat down and wrote a letter I had been becoming qualified to write. Stay with me. This is where the paper starts talking. The letter was 1 page. It was polite. It was typed. And it was a key turning in a lock. My sister forgot the house. Even had. Because here is the thing almost nobody tells you. And if you take one practical fact away from this whole video, make it this one. If you are a beneficiary of a trust, meaning the money is meant for you, or partly for you, the law gives you the right to demand an accounting. An accounting is exactly what it sounds like. A line-by-line report of every dollar that came into the trust and every dollar that went out, what it was spent on, and what is left. You don't need a lawyer to ask. You don't need permission. You don't need to be on speaking terms. You write, and the trustee must answer. In California, they generally have 60 days. My mother's trust, the one Dana had waved around at that family meeting 9 years and change earlier, named 2 beneficiaries after her death, Dana and me. Equal shares. My sister had been legally required to send me an accounting. After Mom died, she never had. For 3 years, the house on Almond Street just sat there in the trust, and the trust sat in silence. And I think she genuinely believed the silence was permanent, that the little sister who saved receipts in a zipper bag would never learn which questions were loaded. So I asked one loaded question. In writing, certified mail, return receipt requested, a formal demand for a full accounting of our mother's trust, covering the entire period of her administration, all 9 years of it, and the 3 since. Then, I waited. 60 days came. 60 days went. Nothing. Not a binder, not a letter, not a phone call. And I want you to understand, that silence was the best gift my sister ever gave me, because a trustee who ignores a lawful demand hands you the next move on a silver tray. The next move is a petition. You go to probate court, the court that supervises exactly this, and you ask a judge to order the trustee to account. I hired my own attorney for it, an independent trust litigation lawyer with no connection to my firm, because I follow the rules even when the other side never has, especially because the other side never has. That is not a halo. That is strategy. Every rule I followed was one less thing her lawyer could ever point at. The judge signed the order without drama. Trustees get compelled all the time. It is a Tuesday in probate court. Dana now had a deadline with a court stamp on it, and a new expression in her voice on the one voicemail she left me that month. A warm, urgent, let's not do this through lawyer's voice. The concerned voice, you know, The one. I didn't call back. Paper was talking now. I wasn't going to interrupt it. The accounting arrived on a Thursday, prepared by an accountant her lawyer had clearly hired in a hurry, in a white binder about 2 inches thick. I took a personal day. I made coffee. I sat at my little counter next to the blue notebook, and I opened the thing my sister never wanted to exist, and I read it the way I read for a living. Twice. Once for what it says. Once for what it is hiding. It wasn't hiding well. Let me walk you through it. The way I walked through it. Page by page. 3 exhibits. I'll give each one a name so you can keep them straight, because these 3 are the whole case. First, what I came to call the caregiver pages. Schedule of disbursements. Pages 9 through 14, starting 7 years before my mother's funeral. The same season my card was declined at that pharmacy counter. There began a monthly withdrawal of $1,500. The memo line, month after month, said caregiver compensation. 84 withdrawals. 84 months, 7 unbroken years. Ending the month. Our mother died. $1,500 a month. For 7 years. That is $126,000. Paid to whom, you ask? The accounting listed the payee with a straight face. Hale Whitmore. My sister. My sister had been paying herself a salary for caregiving. For the years I did the bathing, the lifting, the 2 a.m. turning, the pills, the ramp built out of plywood, while putting me on an $800 leash and making me photograph receipts. The trust is paying for professional care now. I told you that sentence would come back. There it was. 84 times. She hadn't even lied to me at that pharmacy. She'd just let me stand next to the truth, in the wrong light. I want to make that number mean something you can feel. $126,000 is more than my mother cleared in her last decade of teaching 3rd grade. It is every paycheck I earned in my first 4 years of rebuilding, roughly twice over. It was drawn from a retired teacher's careful money at $1,500 a month by a woman who visited, on average. And yes, this became a real exhibit. From the visiting nurse's sign in logs, 1.5 times per month. Second, the remodel checks. Pages 17 and 18. 6 checks, written across 5 months. 4 years before the funeral, to a construction company. Total, $41,000. Memo lines. Home maintenance and property improvements. Sounds responsible. Except I lived in the trust's only property through those exact months, patching its actual roof leak with a bucket in the attic, wheeling my mother up a plywood ramp. No contractor ever set foot on Almond Street, but I had seen that company's name before, on the cedar ramp with the rounded railings, at a Thanksgiving, leading up to a kitchen with a rowboat island and a faucet you wave at. The inheritance from her husband's late aunt, it turns out, was our mother, who was alive and diminished and watching it happen from a wheelchair. Nice kitchen. 2 words. Words my mother knew 4 years before I did, and she told me in the only size sentence she had left. And I laughed. That one I had to stand up and walk around the apartment for. Third, the house loan. And this is where the envelope from the driveway finally opens, 18 months before the funeral. Using the power of attorney, my sister had opened a home equity line of credit at Sierra Pacific Savings. A home equity line of credit is exactly what it sounds like, once you slow it down. A loan against the house itself. The paid-off house my mother spent 30 years earning, turned back into someone spending money. Credit limit, $150,000. Over the following 14 months, while our mother lay in a hospital bed by the garden window, Dana drew $89,000 against her house. and the statements in the binder showed exactly where it went. Transfers to a personal account. Payments on a personal credit card. Not $1 of it traced to a nurse, a therapist, a wheelchair, or a single hour of anyone's care. That heavy envelope I'd handed over in the driveway. Being raised right. That was the loan statement. Insurance paperwork, she'd said, and dropped my mother's mortgaged future into her purse. Like a parking ticket. So let me do the arithmetic for you. Once, so it never has to be done again. $126,000 in caregiver payments to herself. $41,000 in remodel checks. $89,000 drawn against the house. $256,000. $256,000 is $250,000. It is more than my mother's house was worth when my parents bought it. It is 9 years of my unpaid labor, converted into stone countertops and a settled credit card by the responsible one. I closed the binder. I sat for a while in my 300 square feet with my hand flat on the cover, and I felt, and I know you are expecting rage, and I looked for it too. I felt still, the way a courtroom is still, because I finally, fully understood something. I had spent years thinking my sister was greedy, which is a feeling. She wasn't a feeling. She was a system. Patient, papered, self-soothing. A machine that converted our mother into liquidity and called the conversion love. And I had spent 4 years, without quite admitting it to myself, becoming the person systems answer to. Constance was right. People lie. Paper doesn't. And the paper, at long last, was speaking in complete sentences. My attorney filed the petition 3 weeks later. In plain words, it asked the probate court for 4 things. To find that Dana had breached her duty as trustee, to surcharge her. A surcharge order is the court making a trustee personally repay what they misused out of their own pocket. To remove her as trustee, and to appoint a successor. Which brings us, at last, back to the beginning. The conference table, the pearls, the check. Her lawyer had requested a settlement conference before the hearing. And I agreed, because I agree to everything reasonable. It reads well later. That is where the $50,000 cashier's check came out. Slid across the wood with the phrase about being adults. $50,000. In exchange for dropping the petition and signing a release. $50,000. Against $256. Not even a fifth of what she took, offered as a favor. In a tone that suggested I was the one being difficult. Dana herself spoke. Only once, at that conference. She looked at me across the table. The first time she'd looked directly at me since she watched me read a letter in a funeral dress. And she said, "Nora, this is what Mom would have wanted. Family handles things. Privately. Someone has to be. The responsible one." I said, "I agree." And I slid the check back, and I said the 3 things I had come to say. I said them slowly, in order, like numbered paragraphs, because I wanted her to recognize the format. 1. The accounting you filed under court order documents. $256,000 in transfers that benefited you. Your own accountant's binder. Your own memo lines. I brought nothing to this case, except a stamp and a statute. 2. I am not settling, because I am not the person you are actually negotiating with. You are negotiating with the paper, and the paper doesn't take checks. 3. I'll see you at the hearing. Then I gathered my folder and left, and I will tell you honestly. My heart was going like a hummingbird the whole elevator ride down, because calm is a performance you give with your voice, while your body files its objections. But I gave it. 9 years of practice keeping my voice level in hard rooms. It turns out, transfers. The hearing came on a Tuesday morning. Probate court is not television. Nobody shouts. It is a quiet room where a judge who has seen everything reads glasses down through a stack of paper, and the truth is decided at the speed of turning pages. Dana wore gray, and her lawyer's voice had lost its lacquer. The visiting nurse's sign-in logs went in. The contractor's invoices went in, subpoenaed now, showing the job site address, which was not Almond Street. And the Sierra Pacific loan statement went in, exhibit stickered, 3 years after I'd carried it up a driveway, and her lawyer objected to it, and the objection was overruled in 4 words. The judge ruled from the bench. I wrote down 1 sentence of it, verbatim, on my legal pad, and I have it still. The court said, "The record reflects a trustee who treated the trust as a personal account, and the beneficiary as free labor." A personal account. How free labor. 14 words. From a stranger with a gavel. And they named 9 years of my life more accurately than anyone in my family ever had. Then came the orders. And I am going to give them to you flat and factual. Because the facts are the catharsis. And they don't need my help. Dana was removed as trustee. Effective. Immediately. Dana was surcharged the full $256,000, plus interest running back years. With interest, just over $300,000. The court's math. Not mine. Her claim for my quote-unquote back rent was denied in 1 sentence, offset against the free care I had provided, which the court valued, conservatively, at more than everything she'd ever taken. And the court appointed a successor trustee to take over our mother's trust, a licensed professional fiduciary, in good standing, known to the court, who happened to be a beneficiary and happened to be sitting in the 2nd row. Me. How? The judge appointed me. The girl with the receipts in a zipper bag was now, by court order, the responsible one, on the record, with a bond and a case number. The consequences arrived on their own schedule after that, the way consequences do, quietly, in envelopes. To satisfy the surcharge, my sister and her husband listed their house 8 weeks later. I know because the listing was public, and because the photos led with the kitchen, the island like a rowboat, the faucet you wave at, staged, priced, and offered to strangers to pay back the woman it was stolen from. She sells houses for a living. She had to sell her own. I did nothing to cause that. Beyond winning, the math caused it. There is a special flatness to that kind of justice that no shouting match could ever reach, and the finding itself, breach of trust, surcharge, removal, sits in a public court file with her name on it. Forever, 1 record search away from any client who ever wonders whether their realtor is careful with other people's money. She did not go quietly. Of course, systems never do. Over the following 2 months, I received 11 voicemails, in a progression you could chart. Warm, then wounded, then furious, then wounded again. An email with the subject line family, 4 paragraphs long, containing the words devastated, vindictive, and mom's memory, and not containing anywhere the word sorry. I kept every one of them and answered none of them, on advice of counsel and of Constance, whose advice was shorter. Then, one Thursday, she came to my office, marched past our reception into the hallway, in real estate armor, and demanded to know how I could do this to family. The whole floor could hear it. My client's files were on my desk, 14 people, protected by the same statutes I'd used, from the same kind of relative, now standing in my doorway, and I gave her the only reply I had left, and the only one she'd ever understand. Because she wrote it. I said, "You taught me someone has to be the responsible one." The court decided it is me. This office is for clients. You can reach the trustee in writing. Then I closed my door. Not hard. Softly. softly, was the whole point. Now I have to tell you how it actually ends, and I should warn you. If you are waiting for the reunion, the tearful phone call, the sister showing up in the rain having finally understood, you can turn this off now. That video doesn't exist. What I got instead is smaller, and it is mine, and I wouldn't trade it. My first duty as successor trustee was an inventory of the trust property, a formal walkthrough of the house on Almond Street, cataloging what the trust owned. So on a Saturday morning, 4 years and 2 months after I'd walked out of that house with 2 suitcases, I walked back in with a clipboard, by court appointment, through the front door, which I opened with a key from the property manager, because my key had been surrendered on a red ribbon at a funeral. The house was mostly emptied. Dana had, quote, kept the real valuables safe years ago, which is a sentence I invite you to sit with, knowing what you now know about what she considered valuable. But the kitchen was the kitchen. Same counters, same brass hook under the light switch, empty and on the top shelf of the pantry, behind a bag of sugar gone solid as a brick, was my mother's flour tin. The dented one. And when I lifted it, something shifted inside where only flour should have been. So I opened it. Inside, rolled up and rubber banded, was a blue spiral notebook. Same brand as the recipe book on my counter at home. Same. She'd bought 2. I stood in that kitchen and unrolled it, and the first pages were recipes in her strong old handwriting, decades old. And then, partway through, the handwriting changed. It shrank. It slanted. It became the labored, post-stroke hand. I knew from the little spiral pad, one hard one line at a time, written in stolen minutes I never saw, and it stopped being recipes. It became a log. Dates. Short entries. D. Wasamposan. Took papers today. Bank envelope. DD. Purse. Purse. Ask about kitchen. Hers, not mine. Some entries were just initials and arrows. I'll never fully decode, but she had seen it. All of it, or enough of it, years before I did, trapped behind a mouth that wouldn't cooperate. Writing in the only room where she was ever briefly alone. Hiding the truth in a flour tin like a prisoner of war. The last dated entry was from about 2 months before she died. The handwriting is barely handwriting. It took me a long time to be sure of it, and I am sure of it. It says, N does everything. N. Ao2 fars. Aisham is owed. Make it right. I did not cry in that kitchen. I finished the inventory because I was there under a court appointment, and the clipboard came first. She of all people would have understood that. But in my car, in the driveway where I'd once turned a heavy envelope over in my hands, I sat with that notebook against my chest, and I cried for a long time. The only time in this whole story, and the only witness was the garden. And I am telling you about it because you've come this far and you've earned the whole truth. It was not sad crying, or not only, it was the crying you do when you find out that all those years, in the house where you thought no one was keeping track of you, someone was keeping track of you. Dana had kept the real valuables safe. She just never knew where they were. They were in the flour tin. They were a witness statement. Here is the rest, quickly, because good endings are mostly logistics. As trustee, I petitioned the court to let me buy the house from the trust myself. Full appraised value, independent appraisal. Every disclosure filed. My sister formally notified. A judge's signature on top, because a fiduciary buying trust property has to be cleaner than clean, and I intend to die never having given anyone a paragraph to use against me. The purchase money went into the trust. The trust settled out. The surcharge she pays down monthly, by court order, goes into the trust too. and half of all of it, I'll note for the record, still flows to her as beneficiary, because the law is fair even when people aren't, and I administer the law now. I collect what she owes and I distribute what she is due, to the penny, on time, every quarter, with a statement. I am scrupulously, eternally, professionally polite to her in writing. I think it is the worst thing that has ever happened to her. And I live on Almond Street. I rebuilt the ramp in cedar with rounded railings because my mother deserved that the first time. The roses survived 4 years of nobody. Roses are spiteful like that. I love them for it. Emmy found me on her own. By the way, 16 now, sharp as her grandmother. She texted me out of nowhere last spring. And it said, I remember, you were the one who was always there. Can I come see the house? She comes most Sundays now. I am teaching her to cook out of the blue notebook. The first one, the front of house one. She is getting good at the pot roast. She knows the whole story. I told her the true version, flatly, once, and never brought it up again. And neither has she. What she does with it is hers. Like I said, in a family, the little ones see everything. Sometimes, that is the mercy. Last Sunday, after she left, I stood in my kitchen. My kitchen, no island, no wave, at faucet, just my mother's counters and the smell of onions. And I looked at the door, on the little brass hook under the light switch. There is a key again. My key, to my house, on the same red ribbon, which I found in a junk drawer during the inventory, because my sister kept the key and threw away the ribbon. And if you understand why that detail broke me a little and then fixed me completely, then you understand everything I've been trying to tell you. And on the counter, side by side, are 2 blue notebooks, one that fed me for 9 years, and then fed me for 4 more, and one that waited in a flour tin, patient as paper, until somebody fluent enough came home to read it. My sister spent her whole life saying someone has to be the responsible one. And she was right. She just never checked who was taking notes. If this story found you on a hard night, if you are the one holding the pill tray and the receipts right now, invisible, exhausted, told you are lucky to be allowed to give everything away, hear me. You are not the family failure. You are the record of what love actually looks like when it has to lift things. Keep your papers. Learn to speak theirs. And write it down, even if all you can manage is 2 words. Somebody fluent is coming. It might even be you. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. If this story meant something to you, like the video and subscribe so the next one can find you. And if you already commented stayed, go read the replies under your comment. That is the family that shows up. She squeezed my finger twice. At the very end, that was our signal for yes. Yes, Mom, it is right now.